The purpose of antagonists in video games is always essential to spark emotional investment. In RPGs, this is even more crucial to the telling of a compelling story. They are the simple contrast to the often more complex protagonists. The evil archetypes make the goals for players clear and serve as achievements to complete. Stereotyping antagonists have evolved into characters with more depth, nuance, and motivations as time went by. There is more to learn about them than just the reason they want to destroy you or the world around you. This can spark moral questions for the player, or even empathy towards the antagonist and their motivation. The slow evolution of antagonists in RPGs confront players with their own morals and to reflect themselves in both protagonists and antagonists. Let's dive into the evolution of antagonists in RPGs. The archetypal antagonist, evil for evil's sake. In the early days of RPGs, antagonists were displayed as the pure embodiments of evil, designed just as opposition to the hero and drive a narrative of protagonist versus antagonist. They lacked motives or personal backstories. The archetypal antagonist is a simple display of power and malice. This gives players a solid foundation to go against the antagonist without moral questioning in black and white, with no shades of gray. Examples can be found in big franchises like Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest. In Final Fantasy IV, Golbez is the powerful, manipulative, and ruthless antagonist hunting the crystals. He's the classic villain who pushes the story forward with his dark actions. In the end, Golbez gains more depth, as he's the marionette of an external force. It gives him a small layer to his villainous actions, while keeping him mostly in the traditional antagonist role. In Dragon Quest III, Zoma and Baramos are the epitome of evil antagonists. There is very little backstory or motivation on why they want to wreak havoc in the world. It is an intentional design of the creators in this case. That decision makes the player's path with the protagonist very defined. The need to confront and defeat the antagonist is clear from the onset, making the experience feel heroic in a grand proportion. By creating a contrast between good and evil, the focus lies on action and progression in the game. The antagonists do not evoke empathy or challenge players' moral perceptions. They just give a goal to chase and makes the achievement of defeating them a satisfying feeling for players. The tragic antagonist, evil fueled by personal loss or trauma, with the evolution of RPGs follows the evolution of antagonists. No longer just being evil for the sake of evil. Antagonists now mostly resemble tragic figures with their motivation stemming from personal loss, trauma, or misconstrued ideals. No longer were they just a threat, but also became characters that players could sympathize with. The shift in the way antagonists were displayed added emotional depth to the stories in RPGs. Psychological dimensions of the villains were more invitational to explore by the players. Evil personified with a tragic backstory is Luca Blight in Suikoden 2. He is the embodiment of cruelty and tyranny. He has a violent and sadistic nature, and doesn't he hesitate to use the worst kinds of violence against other humans, with ruthless slaughter as example. The motivation stems deeply from his childhood, with the loss of his mother in an ambush by the rivaling nation. Fueled by the twisted view of strength, he is painted as the antagonist who believes his actions are justified. The layers of emotional engagement makes him more complex than the traditional archetype of protagonist. This also counts for Sephiroth in Final Fantasy VII. He's one of the most iconic and known RPG antagonists of all time. He once was a member of an elite military group and a celebrated hero. His world crumbles, however, as he finds the truth on his origins, created as a scientific experiment by a corrupt organization. His descent is fueled by the deep sense of confusion and betrayal. He goes on a search for his true identity while his rage grows. This culminates into the desire to destroy the planet. Players of this game are forced to confront Sephiroth with his actions, but also the pain that triggered his motivation. Tragic antagonists add emotional weight to the story. They serve as the mirror to the own experience of players and challenge them to question fine lines between heroes and villains. This can make the defeat of Luca Blight not just satisfying, but also deeply emotional. With Sephiroth, the player's journey creates a bittersweet element through the entirety of the game. With the tragic archetype of antagonist, games result in a more nuanced type of narrative than the stoic evil-to-be-evil antagonist. The antagonist as a reflection of the hero, when villains mirror the protagonist, from evil antagonists just being evil without motive to tragic archetypes. Sounds like evolution. It doesn't stop there, however. Evolution made the new style of antagonist a reflection of the protagonist. They highlighted the flaws and fears of the hero. The villain shares a common trait or the same background or heritage as the hero. Yet, they are different in important moral or philosophical ways. Conflicts between them are more than a battle for victory. They are now a struggle that challenge the protagonist's way of thinking and beliefs. Joey Atreides in Suikoden 2 shares the same fate as main character Ryu. They both share a tragic history as orphans and are recruited into a conflict at young age. While Ryu chooses the path of peace and unity, Joey chooses a path of power and manipulation. Joey believes that violence is the only way to achieve the goals of a land without borders and full freedom. While Ryu resists corruption, Joey opens up more to the ideas of using it as leverage. The confrontation of ideologies force questioning to the choices players make in the game. When there is divergence in moral and belief between the two counterparts, players get more emotionally invested and attached. It also opens up opportunities for self-assessment and a view to the own past. It can cause self-reflection and open up more complexity as RPGs create deeper and more intense moral dilemmas to experience. The psychological antagonists, exploring deep-rooted trauma. They have complex personalities shaped by deep scars caused of unresolved trauma or even an existential crisis. Personal struggles with identity, moral, or purpose are the driving factor behind their actions. The force that shapes their worldview originates in their trauma. They are as much tragic as antagonistic. Players are challenged to dive deep into the dark parts of the psyche and to consider effects of trauma and mental health on behavior. Adam and Eve in NieR, Automata are prime examples. Androids trying to grapple their purpose and humanity with existential questions lead to violent actions. They struggle deeply in a destroyed world to find meaning. Adam wants to understand humanity through violent ways. Eve becomes more erratic, driven by an identity crisis and loss of a brother. Their motivations don't stem from pure evil, but is rooted in confusion and sadness from psychological crisis and trauma. Psychological antagonists will expose players to more diverse themes such as mental health and the lasting effects of trauma. These antagonists are not there to be just defeated, but reflect mental and emotional struggles that can shape a being as life. Defeating them will not always feel like easy victory, but serve as emotional nuance and acknowledgement of the antagonist's struggles and life. This can also result in the sympathy for antagonists, such as for Kefka Palazzo in Final Fantasy VI. He looks the classic antagonist of chaos and destruction. However, you discover that he was mistreated and neglected for years by superiors. Being a test subject, he struggles to find his own identity. The tragic transformation from a manipulated subject to a villain reshaping the world by destruction makes you feel sympathy towards Kefka. The evolution of antagonists in RPGs is a grand evolution in gaming history. The experience is more engaging and challenges thoughts on multiple levels for players. By blurring the lines between protagonists and antagonists, it invites players to self-assess and self-reflect. This makes not just for an invested time in the game, but also leaves a lasting emotional reflection. Depending on the design and other aspects of the game, this can resonate long after the final battle has ended in victory.